best facilities and attack approaches to the fire and in place as soon as possible. When it comes to water, is perhaps more my comments towards that. We had a drought which resulted in water restrictions or reduction of water intake for our industries, for all businesses in the district, of 25% overnight, basically. We ourselves have started to reduce or reduce water consumptions from December onwards, because we could see that the drought was on the horizon, sort of. We have already reduced the water consumption by roughly about 25% when this restriction came into place. But what we also did, once the restriction came into place, we had more emphasis on even further reductions internally. And I can tell you, it is amazing what is happening if you put your heads together with each and every one on the ground with open eyes, open ears, and sharing ideas, what you can achieve. This was a fantastic experience. Typically, water has been taken for granted throughout the world, not only here in New Zealand, and it's relatively cheap, relatively. But if you are confronted with a situation where you are deprived of that essential resource, you will think extremely hard to survive. And that was a fantastic experience that we could reduce it even further, and we have ongoing effects of these reductions. So sometimes we need to stick really to start to think.
Dieter Adam there. Thanks, Dieter. When will we see a comprehensive government strategy for the manufacturing sector? Well, you'll be aware that we're already doing work with you through the Future of Work Forum. I'm part of that. We're also, I think, have delivered some pretty important changes to the tax system already in terms of the research and development tax credit. But actually, I wouldn't mind having a chat to you, Dieter, as to what you think we should include in a comprehensive government strategy for the manufacturing sector. Quite a few things that we identified in the manufacturing report that we did within opposition we're actually slowly ticking off, or not that slowly, some of them. But I'm sure we can always do better, so send me a draft.
Maybe, David, I have a question. Productivity in New Zealand is not very good. And productivity improvements require typically quite a lot of investments. So how do you, or the government, helps and support and encourage investments? I'm not necessarily talking about FDIs or new capacities, but the existing facilities to upgrade or to replace existing facilities.
Well, when we were in opposition, we actually suggested that one tool we might use was accelerated depreciation on assets in this sector. We haven't brought that forward as a policy yet, but we haven't rejected it as a policy option for the future. You've got to have the revenue to back it, and we're having problems getting a bit of revenue, some of the things that we've suggested or the tax working group suggested recently. So in terms of, I really do believe that capital allocation decisions are really, really important. It's why I'm actually with Murray when it comes to internalising external signals so that the right investments are made in the right sectors. Now, part of that lies in the tax system. I don't think there's much doubt that we invest too much in some non-productive assets in New Zealand. Whether we can successfully address that, time will tell. But one of the points that I touched on earlier made by the Productivity Commission is that we've got low per capita capital investment. Now, one of the challenges that you have when you're a country that's got very high rates of population growth, which we have relative to most developed countries, and you can't stop people doing what they want to do. So you can't affect birth rates, really, but you can actually have an effect on other causes of population growth outside of humanitarian immigration, which really can't be touched. And if you get those things wrong, then you distort, in my view, investment towards non-productive parts of the economy, and you also are forever catching up on infrastructure spending, some of which is private, some of which is public, but both of which are uses of short capital. or scarce capital. So if you want to increase your per capita capital investment into productive enterprise, you have to be a bit careful about the opportunity cost of overinvestment in other parts of the economy.
Thank you. Questions from the floor, please? Oh, the first one. Okay.
How will the PCE report influence or not government's ETS policy? You're referring to the most recent report from Simon Upton into, he's produced a report recently that says that, and actually the Productivity Commission said something similar earlier. We've got to be very careful that we don't fool ourselves that we can apply offsets to reductions in long-lived gases, namely CO2, which lasts for about 1,000 years. Because if you use offsets, including forest offsets, to offset to those emissions, you get to the end of having done that and you've still got to reduce your emissions. So he's suggesting that we should in the future reserve our carbon offsets for shorter-lived gases, namely methane and nitrous oxide. We haven't decided how to respond to that, and it's not my responsibility. Even if we had, it wouldn't be for me to announce. It'd be for James Shaw. I'm not sure how much it matters in the short term, given that we already had a political agreement in the coalition agreement between Labour and New Zealand First that were we to introduce agriculture into the emissions trading scheme, they're only responsible for 5% of their emissions anyway. They get 95% free allocation. And we said that that was true across both nitrous oxide and methane. So if I was the agricultural sector, I'd grab that deal and bank it. Right. Okay.
Thank you, John.